So, today we're jumping into a policy that is so out there it just completely blurs the line between innovative problem solving and an actual dystopian nightmare. It's called Operation La Catapulte, and it was France's, let's call it, a kinetic solution to some very complex social problems. To really get it, we have to start with someone who actually took the ride. And that someone is Jack Skybound Harlan, a YouTube stunt artist who, get this, volunteered to be launched across the English Channel. His take on it really cuts right to the core of this whole thing. You've got the insane thrill of this high-tech solution on one side, and its absolutely terrifying human cost on the other. So what does it actually feel like to be the payload? Well, for starters, imagine the force. We're talking 3 Gs. That's 3 times the force of gravity hitting your body instantly. This isn't some gentle liftoff. It's a violent, bone-rattling shock to the system. And it's designed for one thing and one thing only: speed. And the speed is just incredible. You're going from a dead stop to 150 miles per hour in under 2 seconds. It's a 90-second flight that Jack said was this bizarre mix of pure terror and a strange kind of euphoria. But here's the thing you have to remember. This isn't an amusement park ride. It's a state-sponsored policy.
So that begs the question, right? What kind of problem could possibly lead to a solution that involves launching people out of a giant catapult? This is where we pull back from that personal, visceral experience and look at the chillingly bureaucratic policy behind it all.
The official term, and you gotta love the jargon, is kinetic population management. It's such a sterile, detached phrase for what is a very, very visceral act. The goal? To use raw mechanical force to deal with complex social issues like immigration and homelessness by just moving the people. And who exactly were they moving? The policy was laser-focused on 3 very specific groups: undocumented migrants, the chronically homeless, and people who had records for non-violent misdemeanors. These were the populations that France decided it needed to kinetically manage. Okay, so here's the split. On one side, you have the French government, who framed this whole thing as a dignified alternative to the usual drawn-out expulsion process. But on the other side, you've got human rights groups like Amnesty International, who immediately called it out, pointing to the core ethical problem. When a person is that desperate, can their consent to be shot out of a catapult ever truly be free? And that is the massive divide right at the heart of this policy. You know, an idea this extreme, this visual, it wasn't going to stay a local French issue for long. It quickly grabbed the world's attention, and what started as one country's bizarre action began to spread like wildfire. And the spread was shockingly fast. I mean, look at this. Late 2024, the first launches happen. By the middle of 2025, the UK, who was at first protesting this whole thing, becomes a partner in the transnational Catapulte Alliance. And then, just a couple of months later, the idea jumps the Atlantic in a very, very big way. Of course, that partnership led to rapid innovations. The new Super FS model had 40% more range, it had gyroscopic stabilizers for a smoother ride, and 67% reduction in anomalies, which is just a chillingly neutral way of saying when things go horribly wrong. The technology was getting better, slicker, and more efficient at its grim task. Then came the American order. Former President Trump, campaigning on border security, put in an order for 45,000 units for the U.S.-Mexico border. That's a $1.2 billion contract. And that right there, that was the moment this technology stopped being some weird French experiment and became a global commodity. Big business. But as this thing went global, the human cost just started to skyrocket. So let's shift our focus away from the tech and the billion-dollar deals and back to the people at the very heart of this story, the ones being treated like nothing more than human payload. Now, here's where it gets really complicated. Back in France, the policy was a hit. A survey found that 68% of people in these coastal towns actually approved of it. They said it brought relief to public services. They even gave it a name: La joie de la séparation, the joy of separation, a celebration of what they saw as newfound peace. But that joy had a price. This is the official statistic for channel losses: 0.3%. It sounds so small, doesn't it? But that number represents the people who didn't make it, the ones who didn't survive the journey. It's the cold, hard number behind that 68% approval rating. And what about those who did make it? Well, their experience was incredibly complex. A Syrian asylum seeker, Ahmed Al-Mansour, he described it as terror laced with liberation.
Think about that. In that terrifying moment of flight, he felt a brief, fleeting sense of control over his own destiny. It's just a powerful, heartbreaking testament to the level of desperation that makes a choice like this feel like freedom.
Now, contrast that immediately with the words of one of the engineers who actually built these machines. They anonymously called it a mechanized guillotine of the spirit. The creators themselves felt the crushing moral weight of what they'd built. They didn't see a tool of liberation. They saw a tool of spiritual execution. Meanwhile, on the other side of the channel, the UK was just buckling under the pressure. 180,000 arrivals completely overwhelmed the system. NHS demands shot up, reported bias incidents spiked, and volunteer networks were pushed way past their breaking point. The so-called kinetic solution didn't solve a problem. It just launched it somewhere else.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most absurd and predictable chapter of this whole story. Because once you've created a technology designed for dispatching unwanted things, well, the definition of unwanted can start to get pretty flexible.
So, where does a technology like this go? After you've perfected the art of flinging people across a body of water, what other massive problem could this incredible, terrifying technology possibly solve? The answer? Garbage. Yep. Operation Merdvolante, which roughly translates to flying, well, you get the picture. The exact same catapults were repurposed to launch compressed bales of municipal waste. They turned a human rights crisis into a waste management solution. And the scale is just staggering. France now launches 1.2 million metric tons of its own garbage every single year toward reclamation sites in Scotland. This escalated the whole program from a human rights issue to what Scotland has now branded environmental imperialism. Which leaves us with this final crucial question to think about. In our search for these simple, powerful, kinetic solutions, do policies like this actually create order, or do they just launch our problems over the horizon, deferring the discord for someone else to deal with, whether that payload is a person or just a pile of trash?